G's, no design on my jacket. Work hard, now I'm changing my bracket. Talk tough, we ain't hearing that racket. Dots came in, you know how to stack it. Don't take it wrong, but I'ma need my ends though. I got tigers on my chest like Kenzo. Rail came, yeah, he putting that Benz though. Carol's here, man, you know he stay 10 toes. Big dog, man, you know I ain't worried. Bent up, so I'm talking real slurry. Got a blast, bro.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. How we doing, baby? This is Adam Caplan, the voice in your ears, and we're getting right to it. Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva at the Desert Diamond Arena in Glendale, Arizona. Jake Paul gets it done by a unanimous decision, and let's just say a lot of people have things to say, but not after Saturday night. That was a performance that, in my opinion, solidified that Jake Paul is ever growing and ever improving in the boxing game. And I know right off the bat, the biggest problem is that he fought a 47-year-old in Anderson Silva, who was a middleweight MMA champion. He's not fighting boxers, but come on now. In his last 3 fights, he's fought in Tyron Woodley twice, and Anderson Silva once. Okay, 2 former UFC world champions that. Definitely Silva, but even Woodley at the time had an argument to be in the Hall of Fame. So I get it, this whole argument about he hasn't fought a real boxer, but come on now. The experience alone between Woodley and Anderson Silva is far greater than any of the boxers that he could fight right now. And the funny thing is that besides Tommy Fury and Hasim Rahman Jr., no one has even brought in any great names to the table. All of the people that are crying and complaining about who Jake Paul is fighting have not even brought to the table a worthy enough opponent for Jake to fight. And I don't mean worthy in the sense that Jake is like the almighty world beater that nobody could beat. But let's call it spade a spade. Jake is an attraction. He needs to fight other attractions. There's no reason for him to build up a no-name boxer's notoriety and superstardom by having him fight Jake Paul, and he might have more skill than him. And I know it's all about fighting the most skilled guys, but come on, this is a business. It's all about fighting the people who could also help sell the most pay-per-views. And I think after having Tommy Fury not happen, not having Rahman Jr. happen, they went right to the final boss in Anderson Silva. They knew that he was going to sell pay-per-views. And last night showed it because Silva got the pop of the night. It wasn't Jake Paul. Jake Paul was booed the entire time. So let's get right into the fight. First off, I gave the first round to Jake Paul. I know that most folks gave it to Silva due to the fact that he landed that overhand left, but I felt that Jake controlled the round more with his jab. And that was basically that. It was a casual first round. They were feeling each other out. And that kind of helped set the table for the spectacle that we saw over the rest of the 7 rounds, because I'll be real with you, I had a great time watching the fight. I thought it was super entertaining. Both of these guys were a great matchup for each other, and there was a great storyline behind it because they were so humble and so respectful. And for Jake to go in there, whether or not he beat a 47-year-old and beat his idol in Anderson Silva that he took the famous photo with at the farm fair or the county fair, to then that kid being in Glendale, Arizona, standing across from him, it's insane. So going back to it, I believe I gave the second round to Silva. I gave the third round to Silva. I gave the fourth round to Jake Paul. And then obviously that 5th round happened where that was a complete total domination by Anderson Silva. Looked as if the tide was turning once again because Silva did win that 2nd and 3rd round in my eyes, and then Jake took it back. But then Silva turned it up to a whole nother level in that 5th round and couldn't finish Jake. Jake kept his cool. Now, one thing that I loved about what Jake was doing, every time he was up against the ropes or in a tough spot, he would absorb the punches in a nice high guard, but wouldn't stay there for longer than he needed to. As soon as he blocked the first 2 punches, he started moving laterally, or he pulled a veteran move and stepped into Anderson Silva to clinch up. And that frustrated Silva. And that was the story for most of the evening, was the fact that when Silva was closing in on Jake and putting the pressure on with his experience and his skill, Jake was still able to keep a nice tight guard and then move his feet. And that's high boxing IQ right there. I'm sorry. Did I like the way that Jake was throwing his jab? I didn't. I felt that he could have stepped his lead foot a little bit more towards the outside to really land that jab down the middle. But because he was avoiding the left hand from Anderson Silva, he was, it almost seemed as if he was landing it with his pinky first, because he wasn't opening up his base with that lead foot because he didn't want to get countered with the left hand. So I wasn't a big fan of the jab. And I wasn't a big fan of how sometimes Jake doesn't move his head enough. That high guard is good for the first two punches, and then you do want to move your feet. But at the same time, when you're inside, like Silva was for a good majority of the fight, especially when he was trying to bring the pressure to Jake, that's when you got to move your head movement. You got to bring your head movement. You got to lower your base, and you got to have your hands right on those cheekbones, and you got to be rolling with them punches. And that didn't happen from Jake, and that's why he was susceptible to that lead uppercut from Silva when they were inside, because Jake wasn't moving his head enough. He was resting on Silva's chest, and when the ref didn't break it up with the clinch, Silva took advantage of it and kept landing those uppercuts. Gave the fifth round to Silva. Then that famous sixth round comes up, because Jake Paul knocked out Tyron Woodley in the sixth round. Nothing happens there, but Jake does seem to have turned up the heat. I think he did know that it was the sixth round and he wanted to make something happen with it. Nothing did succumb to it, but what in fact did happen was that seventh round where Jake Paul just took complete control of the round. And I don't know if that was a veteran move in Anderson Silva by taking a round off, we'll call it, but in a fight that was so close and was indeed not even close to a 12-round fight, you can't be doing that. So Jake definitely took over the seventh round. And then that eighth round happened. Both guys were ready to go toe-to-toe, and Jake stole the round and, in my opinion, stole the fight by knocking down the greatest of all time in Anderson Silva. Hit that right hand right on the nose, which was already bloodied up by Jake Paul, which may or may not have came from a headbutt, which was also a crafty move by Jake. Seems as if some of his conversations with Evander Holyfield paid off, because he closed the distance one or two times and definitely headbutted Silva, which, to those of you who haven't been in the ring before and have absorbed a headbutt, that shit could change the whole course of a fight, and we have seen that time and time again in boxing. And it's actually the reason why, fun fact, why Mike Tyson bit the ear off of Evander Holyfield, was because he was sick and tired of all the headbutts that were happening throughout the fight, and nobody remembers that part of the story because when you bite someone's ear off, you're taking it to a whole nother level. Now, going back to the Jake Paul Silva fight, that eighth round, that famous knockdown, that is going to be playing in all of Jake Paul's highlight reels for the rest of his life and the rest of his career. And that to him builds another portrait view of him knocking down another legend in the MMA world. So Jake Paul, I had it 5-3. I definitely didn't have it 6-2 like the other judges. It was just a really fun and entertaining fight. It was great. I could definitely watch that fight again, but I think that chapter has closed. I really like the fact that they brought George St. Pierre on the broadcast, because that really showed us how strategic Jake Paul is. Kind of screwing with the UFC with how, hey, we brought not only Anderson in, but we're also bringing George St. Pierre, and we're going to keep shedding light on why that fight didn't happen. And slowly but surely, guys like George and guys like Anderson Silva would drop these small little tidbits as to why the fight didn't happen. And as the age-old story goes, the UFC couldn't meet either fighter's demands. So sad, but part of the game. That was a famous clip that on AC Radio of one of my dream fights being George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva. So just a big props to Jake by strategically placing these superstars in the right positions and in the right spots to just help build alternative storylines in his fight weeks, because if you don't think that I'd love to see George St. Pierre versus Jake Paul, you've got to be shitting me. I would be all over that. But I think George is happy and healthy and, most importantly, wealthy, and he doesn't need to get back in the squared circle or the octagon. So Big ups to my man George. We had Mauro Ranallo and Ariel Helwani, AH, on the broadcast. 3 Canadians, 2 Montrealers, inspiring stuff to us content creators who are in the Great White North, who are trying to make it over to the American dream. So big ups to Ariel, big ups to GSP and Mauro Ranallo, representing the red and white well. Look, Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz. Come on, this is the fight that needs to happen. Another guy who Jake is specifically placing in the right positions to line up the fight was Chris Avila. Fought on the undercard of Woodley 2 versus Jake Paul. Also fought on the undercard of Paul versus Silva. Why? So that Nate Diaz attends the events and he gets into fights with people on Team Paul's squad. In the back, he smacked his breathing coach, Lucas Mack. Nate Diaz with the old Stockton slap, smacking the meditation coach. You love to see it. This is the fight that needs to happen. There's no reason for Jake to go fight a real boxer. He just beat Tyron Woodley and now Anderson Silva, and then he's going to fight Nate Diaz. All of those 3 guys together, between their superstardom, their experience level, let's keep in fact that he's beaten 3 world champions in MMA now, Ben Askren, Anderson Silva, Tyron Woodley. Like, these guys have names, they have notoriety. They're not boxers, but they have a lot of boxing experience. Anderson Silva was teasing fighting Roy Jones Jr. Years ago, over a decade ago. Nate Diaz famously helped Andre Ward for one of his camps. So it's like, come on now. Like, why shouldn't he go and fight Anderson or go and fight Nate Diaz? But who should he fight? Daniel Buchansky, who Tommy Fury fought? Who can't even sell a cup of coffee? Why is he going to go and fight these guys? There's no reason for it. I do like the Tommy Fury fight in England, though. I do. But let me finish with the Nate Diaz stuff. I mean, listen, the storyline is already built into it. I was reading a couple of things online that perhaps Nate Diaz is going to fight Logan. That's not the fight to make. Logan wants to be friends with everybody, and that's cool. That's Logan. Logan came back from tremendously dark things that could have ruined his career. So Logan wants to be Mr. Politically Correct, Mr. Nice Guy. That's fine, but not the problem child in Jake Paul. He doesn't want to make any friends. Okay, and if Nate Diaz and Logan Paul happens, and Logan Paul, this isn't the WWE. Nate Diaz is not going to give a fuck about you. Okay, Jake versus Nate is the fight to make. There's a great storyline there. Nate wants to get paid. Jake wants to beat up Nate and get paid. Nate wants to beat up Jake also. It's a match made in heaven. Think about the all access. Think about the promotion. Think about the press conferences. McGregor versus Diaz was cool. I think Paul versus Diaz will be cool also. And for all those people that hate Jake Paul and hate the things that he stands for, or don't even just like the look on his fucking face, now you have a guy like Nate Diaz to get behind, like you had in Anderson Silva. Because I know a lot of people weren't too crazy to get behind Woodley because they're not like the biggest fan, but Silva was a perfect guy. And like I said, you could see at the arena that they were all behind Anderson Silva. Well, Nate Diaz, who was getting easily the biggest pop of the night, second was Sugar Sean, will be the guy to get behind. So don't worry about who Jake Paul's fighting, because 9 times out of 10, he's fighting your favorite MMA fighter for you to get behind so that you could hope and pray that he loses. So, that's why I think the Nate Diaz versus Jake Paul fight works. I don't mind the Tommy Fury fight. Fuck it, do it in England or do it in Ireland. Give McGregor a little stir. I'm doing it in your backyard. When's the last time you fought here? Look how many tickets I'm going to sell. I'm going to beat Tommy Fury in Ireland, and then I'm going to talk shit about McGregor in front of his fans. I think that that's a great shout. Or go and do it in England. Go and do it at Wembley. Why not? Build a good undercard. Why? Because Jake Paul proved that in Glendale, Arizona, when the whole arena is basically booing him, that he could succumb to beating one of the greatest of all time in Anderson Silva. I think he could go over to England and knock out Tommy Fury in front of his fellow countrymen. So that's why I think that one could be a good shout. But at the same time, I kind of think at this point, Tommy doesn't deserve dick. Not really a big fan of the Fury Chisora fight also. So forget that noise. Nate Diaz versus Jake Paul is the fight to make. And I'm looking forward to that one. So big ups to Jake. Lot to improve on. Didn't like the way when he would jab to the body, he would shoot the other right hand out. He was kind of throwing some helicopter punches or looked like a helicopter while doing it. Didn't like the way that he wasn't opening up his base on his jab, but ultimately his boxing IQ has improved. His heart, his determination, his determination, his persistency, his consistency is something to recognize and something to put respect on. Congratulations to Jake Paul. That's all I got for you today, baby. Stay tuned for next week. It's going to be more of a fitness and motivation / Q&A based podcast. A couple of big changes happening in AC's life, nothing regarding to the show, only personal. We're getting back on track. We got to start taking care of ourselves. We got to start getting the mental, the mental right in check so that the physical and the financial and everything else could then fall into play. And if you could resonate with that, start jotting down what your goals are, start thinking where you are, or start realizing where you are, and then start thinking on where you want to be next. AC Radio, we're out, baby.
Big G's, no design on my jacket. Work hard, now I'm changing my bracket. Talk tough, we ain't hear that racket. Dogs came in, you know how to stack it. Take it wrong, but I'ma need my ends though. I got tigers on my chest like Kenzo. Rail came, yeah, he putting that Benz though. Carol's here, man, you know he stay 10 toes. Big dog, man, you know I ain't worried. Bent up, so I'm talking real slow.